We've covered punk. We've covered bars and gigs. Now Johnny and I ask author Rhea Rolman about the influence of alternative music on the alternative communities in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. Welcome to Tales Under the Cat Tree. I'm your host, Dupes, and these are tales by humans for humans. After all, words and stories are what give meaning to the worlds we live in. So today on the podcast, I have two friends on with me. I have Rhea and Johnny. Now, you've heard from Johnny in a couple of episodes about music in Newfoundland, but you have not heard from Rhea. But I would like them to give you an introduction of who they are. So, first of all, Johnny.
Johnny Nolan, you've heard me on the podcast before. I'm an old punk rock guy, been around since the mid-'80s. Currently not playing with any bands, but hopefully getting something on the go sometime soon. Anyway, that's enough for me. I'll hand it over to Rhea.
Okay, hi. I'm Rhea. I'm a writer and journalist. I also work in audio and radio. I'm station manager at CHMR, the campus community radio station in St. John's, Newfoundland, Labrador. And I also do not play music at all. Never have. Never had really an interest in playing music, but music has always been like one of the most important things in my life from, the experiential side of things rather than the musician side of things.
Rhea, so you and I went to university together back in the 90s, and we both worked at the university newspaper and the radio station then as well, and we were going to bands and seeing live shows. Since all of that time, you've done a lot of different things, but one of the most amazing things you've done is you've released a book, which is
A Queer History of Newfoundland.
In thinking about what the 90s were like for me and for many people, music was a central part of what connected us together. For me personally, I'd never even heard of alternative music till I arrived in St. John's. This episode, I wanted to kind of delve into the idea of what music meant, how that may have opened up doors for you that you may not have thought was there for you.
I think it's important to reflect on what that time period was like. The internet and social media did exist, but they were not widespread, not like today. So that wasn't how you found, it was how you found information, but it wasn't as easy to find, you didn't go to social media looking for things. You didn't go to the internet. It was still very much an analog culture. So for me, I remember discovering CHMR, the campus community radio station, when I was in elementary school, just sitting in my backyard playing with a radio. One night I came across CHMR and it was life-changing, discovering all this new music. And it was also a doorway into just such a broader culture, alternative music in all of its forms, punk, industrial, goth. It was the door that opened this door into this wider world. I think a lot of folks would have that experience through social media these days. But so that's how I first encountered so much alternative music and culture. It was all interwoven, the alternative music and the non-mainstream culture. The other important thing I think about the time period is, and we don't often reflect on the social milieu in which we are raised until, after the fact, until we realize just what a rigid social milieu that was. So in Newfoundland and Labrador, in the 90s, it was a very different time. There was no public education system in the province. The schools were all run by the churches, who very much controlled, what students and youth had access to. And certainly some denominations were more liberal than others, but the churches played a huge gatekeeping role in what types of culture and information students and youth had access to. So having access to information and ideas outside of that strictly regulated space for any marginalized group, whether it is racialized minorities, religious minorities, queer students, you had to get that elsewhere. And without the social media, without the internet, one of the important spaces you got that was from radio and from music and from the cultures that arose through music. Also, from a human rights perspective, there was no human rights protections around sexual orientation until the end of the 1990s. So it was very common for folks to be discriminated against in housing, employment, and so forth. And this was also the height of the AIDS crisis too. So there was a lot going on in St. John's, and you often don't think of yourself as growing up in a very repressed space until you look back and realize just how repressed and controlled that space was. So I think the music community and the music culture had a real powerful, political importance in terms of how it introduced folks to so many. It was the gateway to other ideas and other notions of how to organize and live and form community. And certainly it played that role for me. And a lot of the folks I interviewed in my book, similarly, whether they were part of the punk community or whether they were part of, going out to the queer clubs at night, those music spaces were their safe spaces. And it was where they formed community. A lot of them where they found family. And really, it was a foundational part of people's lives.
So, Johnny, when you were playing in these in the bands in the 1990s, did you know you were creating those communities? Did you feel that was an active thing, or was it just something that you felt was happening as it went along?
My politics have always been left, right? So I think punk rock and alternative music, even though there's facets of that aren't left-leaning and all that kind of stuff, the majority of it was, the stuff that I listened to anyway, and the stuff that I created, most of my lyrics are pretty left-leaning, and the bands that I listened to were, political in what I consider to be the right ways. Alternative music seems to do that for communities.
I'll get back to the interview with Rhea and Johnny right after this song from the band Dre's Eye Test. The band was named to bring attention to the Dre's test, which puts chemicals in the eyes of animals for test purposes. While the test still exists, the attention brought to it has reduced its use over the years. So this is the band Dre's Eye Test with 451, inspired by Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, performed and recorded live at the Bar Junctions in 1997. there's a place for people to find a home and a community. But there's also the aspect of music bringing those communities to the mainstream. Do you feel like the Newfoundland alternative music scene was able to bring some of those communities, whatever they might be, whether it's queer or whether it's, minorities of a different type, to the more mainstream audience? Did it make things more acceptable?
Certainly, I think so in some ways, but it's always a double-edged sword because, just as alternative music can change the mainstream, when you have that contact, the mainstream can also change the nature of the alternative music and the alternative culture. So I think we've seen that side of things too. In terms of the impact, I think of things like when I was growing up and in high school and junior high, like the Peace Accord. But okay, yeah, it was a really important music festival in Bannerman Park where folks came together and, often chaotically organized, but that was part of the beauty of it, that it just brought so many different ideas and people and communities together. Again, that was happening during the height of the struggle for human rights protections for queer folks, and also during the height of the AIDS crisis and the AIDS struggle. And so I remember there were workshops and folks talking about AIDS and the fight. And then you had so many different bands going on talking about racism and talking about these issues that were not discussed in Newfoundland in any other spaces, really, to a very minute degree, maybe on the media, on the news, but not really. And the popularity of the Peace Accord probably ultimately contributed a bit to its demise. But there was that space where it became so popular, I think, that it did educate a broader public, did bring issues to the news and to the bigger audiences for a period. But also what's really important is, I think, the music, when we talk about live music or even, things like podcasts and radio, it creates spaces where ideas can be exchanged and people talk. And that is really important to organizing, right? I hung out with a group of friends, who were all pretty cool in high school. But when we started going to shows downtown, that things changed because you were suddenly in these physical spaces with so many other people. The spaces when you would like go out for a smoke between sets, and that was incredible, because you would like talk to people and you're there physically with them. So exchanging ideas, learning about protests and rallies and people's different important causes, that kind of intersections was so important. And I think music shows, they brought together people from differing political stripes and interests. A lot certainly were progressive minded because I think music, leans that way. But, it exposed people from all different kinds of backgrounds to each other. Just because they might like a particular band or style of music, they might not have shared politics. They might not have shared, ethnic backgrounds and experiences in Newfoundland, but they would all wind up at that show together and they would all wind up talking together between sets and dancing together. And that kind of in-person community building is so vital and important. We see less and less of that happening these days because, with the growth of the internet and social media, community organizers, labor organizers will talk about that online ad campaigns and stuff doesn't work. You have to connect with people in person. That is that in-person community building that really builds community and makes things change. So I think that's important. And when I look back, like I wasn't really part of the queer community when I was going to shows. But when I interview folks who I knew were organizers, I'm always astounded at how they met each other at shows. They met each other in these clubs. That's where they came together. And that's when they started organizing. You get that critical mass, of people. That's why the growth of the queer club scene in St. John's was important in some ways, because you had all these queer folks coming to St. John's from small rural communities. And in the small rural communities, they were isolated. You'd have just a few people who might be queer in these communities, a lot more vulnerable to repression and bullying and all the bad experiences. But then when they came to St. John's, there was a critical mass of them coming together. And then they can talk about their shared experiences and decide this is not okay. Let's organize to change this. And that's why St. John's played such a key role in the queer liberation movement, not because it's a big city, but because that's where a critical mass of folks came together to talk about their shared experiences of repression.
And I actually really do believe in the idea that role models need to exist. I think if you never see someone of whatever you want to say, whether it's queer, whether it's race or whatever, if you don't see a role model doing something or acting in a certain way, you may not actually follow through with that. Did you feel or did you see role models coming through the music scene that influenced you and that made a difference?
There was always people I guess I looked up to. Liz Picard, I think, definitely as a songwriter, as someone who was also political. She wrote a lot of really great stuff. She was always a great performer, and not only music, but theater and, the plethora of the arts. I'd love to get one of her songs on here.
This seems an appropriate time to play the song One Song from the Liz Band off of their EP, 6 Songs. I had to look up some old print reviews, as I do remember playing this EP often on the air in 1995 and 1996. This EP was released in 1994, and in September 1994, student journalist Murray Sampson wrote about the release in the Muse under the headline, "I can see its head, its body, and hear it wail. It's a Liz Band." So, Rhea, for you.
Dive in on that role model question. Yeah, I think it's important. Again, like for me, it was having access to a lot of these, queer and very like anti-authoritarian kind of musicians. Not so much locally, but having access through, for example, CHMR to learning about these musicians and cultural communities outside of Newfoundland, outside of Canada, even. That was very exciting and important. But locally too, I'm thinking to the shows that I loved going to. And it's funny, I remember going to so many shows at like Haymarket Square. Do you remember that space? Yeah, the Loft.
The Loft, yeah.
In high school, going to shows there underage and getting in somehow. But like, and when I interview folks later, I discovered that space was really important for the lesbian community. All the lesbian dances happened there. And a lot of those community members went to the punk shows too. So you had this real intermingling of communities. But I would go and see like acts like, Dre's Eye Test and Liz, Darshiva, Bung. Like that's kind of the scene I remember very much. And I think one of the things that was important about that, I was writing about this recently. A lot of both Audre Lorde and also Ai Weiwei, I was quoting both of them. Both made these comments about in their art writing about how we don't need more art. We need to focus on cultivating the spirit of the artist. What they were saying is that there is such a focus on commercial opportunities for artists. And that's really important, because artists are, lacking in money and survival. Equally important is cultivating the spirit of the artist. And by that, they mean this, creative, anti-authoritarian, kind of rebellious imagining and reimagining society in different ways. They both have expressed concern in some of their writings that there was too much of a focus on creating commercial opportunities for art, not enough on making sure that we're upholding that spirit of the artist, by which they mean creating the space for that very rebellious art that defies convention, and I think a lot of the art music I was into, did that. It was almost the music was important and the music was great, but a lot of it was about the spirit of that. I remember Bung getting up and just like, ripping apart every institution in society, that was so important. Hearing folks who were able to put voice to these unsettled feelings that many of us have about the way society is working and operating. And a lot of the times, especially, before all these music apps we have today, you often didn't know what the musicians were singing about. There's always that element of, what was that chorus? What was that word? So in some ways you would superimpose your own ideas on these artists, especially when it came to, music. Maybe you got bootleg tapes of some band, without even lyric jackets and stuff. So you try and figure out, what is this band about? What's their thing? So there's an element of imposing your own ideas and desires on them. But all that just to say that the spirit of pushing against the norm, the status quo, that's an important part, I think, of music scenes. And the music scenes that have been so powerful in my mind are the ones that do that. So growing up, that was very much the grunge punk scene. These days, I am obsessed with like Latina hip hop. Like some of the hip hop being produced in South America is just incredible. And that's, there's such a powerful feminist queer spirit being expressed by some of these musicians. So yeah, it's where that spirit gets cultivated, and where folks feel safe and in community to be able to question the ideas they're raised with and come up with new ways and feel empowered in expressing different ways and different ideas. So that's all been very important to me about the music scene, and I think is a reflection of the health of the music scene in any particular place and time.
Do you think that the music scene has changed in a way that has continued from the 90s and 2000s into today in St. John's? Do you see that same sense of community and young children who are now coming of age feeling empowered to be part of different communities as we might have been?
The spirit is still there. I mean, the spirit of whatever you consider punk or alternative to be is still alive and well in the city. I mean, it's just you kind of have to seek it out a little bit more. But still, there's still all ages shows, and there's still kids that are being very political and organizing protests and rallies and stuff that I did when I was younger too. I mean, back in the 80s, the first kind of movement that I got involved with was the anti-nuke movement. We laid down on the middle of Water Street, and like Rhea mentioned, the peace accord brought forward so many issues. Like Plowshares Youth was an important part of my political education, I guess. But it's still going on. Students for Palestine and groups like that. Their music is still there. The music's still supporting those causes. So
you mentioned Plowshares Youth, which I think then morphed into Youth for Social Justice, which put off the peace accord, but also they were equally involved in fighting for youth representation in the queer movement. In groups like that. So they were really fighting on both of these fronts, fighting for queer culture and queer rights for youth and other folks in society, but then also creating these musical spaces. And these things feed each other, You need kind of both of them, I think, in order to really inculcate change and spread ideas. The music helps to make it fun and accessible and something you can build on. And I think today, when I look at festivals like Lanya Vanya, been around for a while, but it's, I think, much like Peace Accord, it's only in the last few years gotten really big. Yeah, spans a couple weeks, and it's great because it brings together local music with music from away, and they also bring in artists and writers and folks. But that combination is so important. Like the show I'm really excited about is this one show featuring like a local musician, Feminautica, who does incredible electronic electro punk kind of music that I absolutely adore. And then she's playing with HRT and /Need, who are from the mainland, but like queer and trans musicians who are also doing that very much kind of electro punk, electro clash kind of music. So, bringing that to St. John's, and there's the role models, I think both for musicians as well as for the broader culture and society, and seeing them come in. We haven't really talked about touring bands, but that's been an important aspect of this too, because when bands go on tour across the country, and the ones that take the effort to come to Newfoundland as well, that's so important because they bring ideas from elsewhere, and they bring that experience of being folks who are involved in other communities on the mainland. A lot of the musicians that toured here in punk bands and other alternative bands were also involved in feminist or queer movements on the mainland. So it's this sharing of ideas, the circulating of ideas. And again, cultivating these spaces where like almost an alternative ethos can exist. Over the last couple months, we had this very public, very intense fight to save CHMR, the campus community.
I was coming on to that. I was going to come on to that. I'm not going to go away without talking about that. So tell me about this and what we're going to do.
It came very much out of the blue when because CHMR is a not-for-profit radio station. We have a student media levy that brings in a big chunk of our funding, but historically has relied very heavily on the student union on campus for funding, the undergraduate students union. And they very abruptly, with no warning, kind of announced just after I took over at the station that they wanted to cut their funding completely. Well, they initially wanted to, quote, shut down the station. And there was a massive community fight back against that. I have not in years seen the community respond to anything in the same way, both on campus and off campus. It was really inspiring seeing how much the space meant to so many people. And you had folks from every age bracket speaking out, from, ranging from folks who are students today to folks who are like retired, and you saw everything in between. You saw how important the space was. But one of the messages that came through loud and clear, and the student union almost kind of fed into that because they were repeating the same language we hear from universities and elsewhere, which is that, well, these days everything needs to be cost neutral and revenue generating. Like the idea that everything has to pay for itself or make money. These things don't lose money. They're not supposed to make money.
They're services to the community. I mean,
Exactly. I think the threat to CHMR was almost kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, in the sense that people are really sad and worried and angry about losing creative spaces. That's what folks said, that this was one of the last remaining creative spaces in the city, really, where people can go just with an idea. You don't need connections. You don't need skills on your resume. You just show up with a desire to do something and a creative idea. We create a space where people can be and can provide all the training and then turn it into an actual radio show or podcast or whatever it is. And those creative spaces where folks can just exist and share ideas and make creative things, we're losing those right and left in our society. And they're so important to preserve. And we certainly had more of them, I think, back in the 90s and in the early 2000s. So yeah, so we did lose our student union fundings, but we saved our space, and we've got a immensely strong community backing now. So we're trying to work out a new kind of operational and budget model that will make sure that we do keep operating and broadcasting into the future. So yeah, that'll probably become more clear as the summer progresses.
I am so glad to hear that something is going to happen, and I hope I can be a small part of that. I will help you with whatever.
Talking about the things that are going on today, and Rhea brought up the Lanya Vanya thing. That festival has become so important to the community, and important to like musicians all across Canada and states. And I think this is the 16th year, I think, of the festival. Dupes, it's really, really great. It's not only music, it's also talks by writers and workshops on developing your musical career or media, or it's a very important festival. And it's probably one of the most important things that's happened in the music scene here in the past 10 years, for sure.
Yeah, last year they bring in like dozens of artists every year, but I remember they brought in Beverly Glenn Copeland.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was an amazing show. Yeah.
Yeah, like queer trans pioneers, and they, you know, did an incredible performance. Like that was really moving to everyone. But I think I always wonder, you know, when will Anya Vanya become too big and lose that magical edge? But they have done an incredible job of making sure that they stay, you know, that they bring in like not the big acts, that they look for interesting new ideas, you know, and that they've been bringing in like Black and Indigenous Palestinian artists.
Exactly. Yeah.
And a range of musical styles, like that so many of the big name bands they're bringing in this year are these like electro punk kind of musicians. Like it's really exciting what
It
they
is.
do.
Yeah.
Before we get to the last question and end the interview with Rhea and Johnny, it's time to play the band that pretty much every episode has so far mentioned. This is, of course, Bung. The song we will play is from the album Hole, which came out in 1994. Writing in the Muse, student journalist Scott Hutchins wrote at the time, "I have heard the sound of summer, and that sound is Bung." And the album is, quote, loud, hard, and explosive. So from the album Hole, here is the song Ramirez.
Your window, your room is warm, and your life is a candle while my life's a yeah, you bound a victim, live in a grave, and an idea of death is in the way we behave. And when you see the days I've done, you will know that it ain't fair, for it's a world. We are all together
So we're coming up on time. So let me ask you both a final question. If you had to name influential artists that really spoke to you and taught you something, or brought you into a community, or made you see a community in a new light, who would that be?
For some reason, Joe Strummer popped in my head, and from the Clash, the way he wrote about things influenced the way that I thought about things, for sure. Songs about, being young and being, not accepting exactly what the hell was going on.
So Rhea, for you.
Well, I mean, in terms of musicians that shaped my life, like, folks I heard on CHMR when I was like, in elementary school listening, like I think a Skinny Puppy. I think the first band I ever heard on CHMR was Pop Will Eat Itself, and just the very countercultural attitudes that they all brought. Einstürzen and Neubauten, the German industrial band, was really important because it also introduced a whole kind of artistic idea, new ideas. They were very, because they were rooted in all kinds of art and political movements. That's how I kind of met my really close friends in high school. I was like, I remember, was it grade 10, like turning around and like carving a Neubauten symbol into the desk of the desk behind me. And this woman who sat down, she was like, "Oh, you know this band?" I was like, "You know this band?" And then we became like best friends, so like, yeah, that was really important. And like, but I think when I think of local bands, I think again of like Bung was so important because they were playing all the time and they were always so angry and defiant, against the norms. Liz Picard, who brought again that element of didn't just do the music, but was also very political and doing art and theater and writing as well. But in more recent years too, I think of, there was that whole phase. Do you remember the Idlers? They were a ska reggae band, and they created community because they played so frequently, and they just like, it was such a big party that people came together and would come together just to go to their shows. Partly, a lot of it was about the music and the dancing, but a lot of it was about the community as well. And you came to recognize this community, that was obsessed with going out and dancing to the ska and reggae music. That it just, it was like random as to who it clicked with. And you almost instantaneously formed this new community by folks who were really interested. And you still see that today, like with some of these punk bands you mentioned. I think of like musicians, I think her name is like Zainab Wilson, who's doing really exciting new music here in St. John's, Liz Fagan, all of Liz's different projects. Like, yeah, it's really exciting to continue to be inspired by these musicians, That's I think an important part of being part of that music community is not just sticking with the bands that had that initial impact on you, but learning to discovering new bands and new musicians who are channeling that same energy, but just in different directions and through different styles and stuff today.
Well, thank you both very much for coming on. Rhea, I would love to talk to you more about the queer history of Newfoundland, because there's so much more about media, especially, that I am very much interested in. And for anyone out there who has not read the book or can pick up the book, you can pick up the book. Thank you very much. And Johnny, as always, thank you very much. We'll be back on the air again with another episode, I am sure, in the near future. So thank you both.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, Dupes.
Thank you.
I have so many people to thank for this episode. Certainly, thank you to Johnny Nolan and Rhea Rolman for their time. I've linked to Rhea's website on my show notes so you can read about her book, The Queer History of Newfoundland, and order your copy. All the music heard on this episode are because wonderful people gave Johnny and I permission. First up, thank you to the band Dre's Eye Test and Bob Earl. Secondly, Liz Picard and the Liz Band for one song. And finally, Phil Winters and the band Bung for Ramirez. All of this would not have been possible without the legwork and efforts of my co-host, Johnny Nolan. For many listeners, this might be the first time you are hearing some of the songs and bands. Please do check out Spotify or YouTube for these wonderful bands and their music. What did you think about our discussion? I would love to hear from you. Please get in touch at contact@dups.ca. Listen to the archives wherever you get your podcasts, or at tales.dups.ca. That's TALES.dups.ca. This podcast is about the worlds we create, the realities we conjure, and the wonders of the human imagination. The podcast, including its intro music, is produced, edited, and created by me, your host, Dili Pujewardana. If you are lucky enough to have a pet, give them some treats and a cuddle until we meet again for some tales under the cat tree.